All right, folks, welcome to the latest edition of the American Praetorians live stream, or whatever we're calling this thing. We've got Dave Butler, author, editor, and actual bard here with us tonight. So, how you doing, Dave?
Great. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Are you, though?
He looks excited. Dave is live from LibertyCon in Chattanooga.
In Chattytown, yeah.
LibertyCon is the most exclusive con in all of science fiction fandom, because if you don't sign up for it in the first minute, you're not going to get a ticket to get in.
Yeah.
So,
At this point, I'm not even sure. They sort of grandfather people who had a previous ticket to getting in. I'm actually not sure what they're going to do, like if they're going to even put tickets on sale next year, or if it's just basically
just like season pass.
Yeah, it's like either you bought into the family already and you re-up for $50 every year, or sorry, I don't know. But yeah, there was famously, Mike's alluding to a couple of years ago, they'd always capped it at about 750 people, I think is the number, and the tickets went on sale at 6 a.m. On a Wednesday or whatever, and they were all gone by 6:29. So it's small, but it's sold out. Yeah.
the reason LibertyCon is membership or attendance is capped is because it's set up as a charity, and in the charter, their number of attendees is listed in there, and they would have to redo the whole thing with their charter, and I think they have to get the state government and the law involved, and it'd be a lot of law wrangling.
Yeah.
Which is the exact opposite of the point of LibertyCon.
Yes.
Yeah. True.
So,
I think there's also an aesthetic preference, right? I mean, there's a big difference. Conventions have sort of personalities, flavors. So Dragon Con is kind of like the carnival of conventions. Like, it's huge and it's sweaty and people are running around half dressed, and there's like, street preachers out Sunday morning yelling at you that R2D2 is sinful, and it's in Atlanta, but it has kind of a carnival feel. LibertyCon is sort of a family reunion, but it's a family reunion of a really big hillbilly clan, which has dramatic overrepresentation of rocket scientists and special forces members, right? Like really high proportions of sort of elite military or actual NASA employees.
still hillbillies, though. Don't.
But hillbillies, right?
There is zero surprise that there is a large overlap between those two groups and hillbillies.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a reason Huntsville's in Alabama.
Well, that's right. And it's right here. That's right. That's right around the corner. So yeah, it's kind of the sci-fi fans in that community. Yeah. Well, it's great. It's one of my favorite. Mardi Gras for nerds. Yeah. Yep. I've heard that.
Including the STDs and
I was going to say, the horses at Mardi Gras make sense. I wouldn't want to see them at Dragon Con, though.
Yeah, it may not be the same range of physiques. That's probably correct.
A lot of beads.
Still of a social nature.
Yeah. All the sweat. Yeah. So so LibertyCon's fun. I've been coming for I think 6 or 7 years. I was invited by the founder. I didn't realize he was the founder. I was at Worldcon in Kansas City, which is a very different crowd. Worldcon is its own kind of.
You don't say.
Yeah. It's its own thing, and it's like it too is sort of like a family, but it's a family that's more likely to have blue hair. And at this point, a lot of them are riding around on electric scooters. So I was walking down the hall in LibertyCon, and I see this group of people playing hearts. And this guy in overalls says to me, "Hey, you're DJ Butler." And I said, yes. First of all, shocked that there's someone wearing overalls, right? He looks like he's a Kentucky hill farmer who's lost his way and found his way into this sort of furries convention. And he said, "You want to come to LibertyCon? It'd be great. You got a book coming out with Baen. I know you do. You'd fit right in." And I said, okay. He said, tell him Uncle Timmy sent you. And
This is the most underground bullshit.
yeah, it was crazy, and like full on guys wearing overalls, right? And so I said, this guy dressed like that at Worldcon, I have to take the advice. Turns out that was Tim Boljo, who was the founder of LimericCon, and he's over the years recruited a lot of people to sort of come. But so yeah, I love it. It's like it's my big hillbilly clan of hard science, Green Beret types.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that it's different than Worldcon. So, like at LibertyCon, between the rocket scientists and special forces, you probably have a lot of people who can speak Chinese but don't need to. Whereas in Worldcon, you have a lot of people who can't speak Chinese but apparently need to now. So,
Well,
If they can manage to make it to Chengdu or wherever it is.
so they
now.
would need to if any of them actually went. So or are going to go.
they're all Zoom conferencing in.
I don't think any
Who is the Russian genocide apologist they have for the guest of honor now?
All of them. What?
Oh yeah.
Worldcon 2023 guest of honor. He's a Russian science fiction author, and let me see here.
Oh, so he writes documents for the Russian government then.
Yeah.
Yes, you're probably right. he's Baghdad Bob, but of Moscow.
It's Sergei Lukyanenko. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
He is he's a bad dude. Not really. I don't know if he's bad or not, but he is a Russian naturalist. Not a Russian
naturalist.
He might be. It might be his hobby, but he's a Russian nationalist who.
You got to protect that pristine Siberian wilderness.
He's very much been a cheerleader for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I have sent you guys the link to his wiki page if you want to share that for the readers. But that's their guest of honor now. So after all the wailing and gnashing of teeth about how awful the people who just didn't want puppy-related sadness were, now they've got an actual cheerleader for war crimes as their guest of honor. Bravo.
Yeah.
Bravo.
Oh, he did
Yeah.
night guard. He was like he did the night watch and day watch bullshit.
Oh, interesting. Those films, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I guess they were novels first, but I think I saw Night Watch and it was just weird.
Well, it was
not necessarily in a good way weird either.
It was Russian ripoff. Like, you know how the Italians just rip off every movie in the 70s and 80s and just turned them into their own thing? That was like that, but for the Matrix.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're gonna have. I'm interested to see if Worldcon actually happens in October because I've heard some things about. I've heard a rumor that the whole thing might just be like a real estate scam or something. I don't know.
Oh, you don't say.
It
Turns out
wouldn't
Chengdu
surprise
doesn't
me.
actually exist.
In China,
It wouldn't
right?
surprise me because the entire Chinese economy is basically based on a big real estate scam at this point.
So we'll see how it goes. Wish them the best of luck. You kids have fun over there in your communist dystopia. So hope it was worth it.
Yeah, it's awkward for the attendees. Yeah, if they attend, right, Robert? That's the point. If they attend, as opposed to dial in by Zoom or exercise their vote with a $40 not attending ticket or whatever. Well, maybe it will be. Maybe. I mean, I think I think the Biden administration just announced that it does not support Taiwanese independence. So, like, I mean, maybe maybe this will all be rendered mute by the Chinese deciding to act upon that information. Strike while the iron is hot.
So Dave,
their guest of honor might get held up by if there's a Russian civil war, which is what everybody's talking about tonight.
Yeah.
Mercenaries versus conscripts. It's going to be awesome.
Oh yeah,
man, somebody should write a book about
prison mercenaries versus conscripts. What's more?
Well, they were all conscripts at one point.
Yeah.
So, Dave,
I don't know if you heard anything, Dave,
what brings
but
you
apparently,
on the screen tonight, Dave? What is going on in your world besides LibertyCon? Do you have a book out? I think you have a book out.
I do have a book out. We're live as of now, yeah. So I have a book out in 2 weeks, I think. 2 weeks Tuesday, maybe.
Well, that scared him off.
Mike's like, well, in that
Yeah.
case, I'm done.
Got to go wait in line if the tickets are going like they are at LibertyCon.
That's right. Hey, knock on wood. Yeah, I've got a sword and sorcery novel out called Between Princesses and Other Jobs. It's a book 2 in a series. It's actually in kind of classic 70s, 60s, 70s style. It's actually 10 short stories and a novella about the same characters.
I'm back. Don't worry. It wouldn't be a stream if I didn't accidentally log out at least once.
Awesome. Welcome back. So yeah, book out in
Mike
2 weeks.
is the technical difficulty.
It's
Yes.
like I asked you what was going on, and it's like just fucked off because I didn't care. You know?
That's how I took it.
Stay fresh, cheese bags.
Seems reasonable. Yeah, so it's book 2 in a series. It's about it's kind of like Fopper and the Grey Mouser, if you know them. So it's a pair of friends who were sword slingers trying to stay decent men, and also make a living in a really decayed and morally compromised, rotting old urban environment. You know, borderline thugs, but trying to be honorable.
So the important question on that is, what's your magic system?
Yeah, okay.
I'm sure.
see,
it has,
now Coop's trying to get kicked.
I'm sure it has lots of rules, right? Lots of very specific rules.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I
many
analyzed
dice
the
rolls do you
spectrum of
get?
colors from infrared to ultraviolet, right? And then depending on the color a character is consuming, he can do different things. Yeah, that is a pet peeve of mine.
I know, that's why I brought it up.
As
Yeah,
as I get older, it's more of a pet peeve. To be honest, I'm not getting over it. I find more and more reasons to be annoyed by hard magic. I mean, look, people like it. Okay, right? That's fine.
You're talking about the concept, not the Larry Correa series.
Not the Larry Correa series.
Although
that's
you
right.
might be, and then we can host a feud on this stream.
Yeah, next month would be Dave versus Larry.
I am willing to have feuds. I'm not sure I'm willing to have a feud
Battle
with
of the
Larry.
Giant.
I think I might like. Let me pick someone else to have a feud. I'll have a feud with Brandon. He's bigger than Larry, but less likely to kill me, I think.
Larry's just a Eddie Bear. I don't know what everybody's.
So it's funny. We've talked about like the gamification of fiction, thus leading into the magic system stuff. And Chris Rocchio actually mentioned an article you wrote just specifically on this topic, and it was a pretty good read. I enjoyed it as not a fan of magic systems myself, but if you could tell our viewers what your problems with the magic systems are.
Let me phrase it in like a new idiom that I have recently encountered. Here's another way to think about the reason that I hate hard magic systems. What is a hard magic system, by the way? First of all, it's bullshit. Like this, they don't exist. They're completely fabricated by writers. Okay. So the idea is, or here's the defense of them. It goes something like this. Oh, in the real world, magic is so kind of nebulous and kind of wishy-washy that it's, it doesn't feel very crispy. It doesn't feel very crisp when like, can a character do or not do something? How do I know what it costs my wizard character to perform this magic spell? That's too vague. So I'm going to design rules where magic is quantifiable. I mean, I've had people tell me things like, I've converted all of the magical acts performable by a wizard in my system into calories. and there's a calorie conversion table to the metallic substance necessary to perform the act, right? So
my my
I've come to the same
You know,
conclusion at some point. Yeah.
yeah, so uh, what I said in the article is that look, again, if you like hard magic, bless your heart. But the problem, and I'll repeat what I said in the article, and then I'll kind of put it like another way. Okay, real world magic lies close to a lot of very important things. Okay, it lies close to religion, and it lies really close to culture, and it lies really close to how we perceive other cultures, and it lies really close to the unconscious mind. Um, and so when you write sort of what I'll call real world magic, but like anyone until 10 years ago would have said magic. And if you're a Sandersonian now, you'll say soft magic. You're tapping into all that stuff, right? And you're trying to explore with these indirect tools subjects that are close to the human heart, that get into like the nature of what does it mean to be human, and what matters to us, and what are some things we can discover about ourselves indirectly, but that turn out to be true and interesting, right? When you say no, all that is wishy-washy, I'm going to have a guy who, if he consumes tin, he can fly, and if he consumes, iron, he can punch hard, and if he consumes, aluminum, he can dance really well, or whatever. Like, you've given up everything that makes fantasy valuable.
Well,
You just throw it away.
it's like putting a number crunching system onto an MMA fight. Like, oh, this guy's got a 5 in punching, so he's going to do well on the strikes. But this guy's got a 4 in his ground game, so his grappling is going to be better. Like, that's not how even normal real world interactions work, let alone adding a mystical element to it.
And a lot of that comes from games, and at least in video games, there's still some skill involved, right? You have to be good at the game to win.
The actual player's dexterity.
Yeah, no matter what the numbers are. Now, tabletop, like role-playing games where it's the roll of the dice, that's a different matter. I don't know how much skill is actually involved in D&D.
Yeah, but like D&D and the role-playing games and that stuff, the magic system is quantified for balance reasons, not for, like the actual function of the system.
Right. That's so why everyone doesn't choose to be a magic user or whatever.
That's why you have to memorize a spell 3 times to use it 3 times, even though it's the same fucking spell. So
yeah.
I think what it's coming from in a large part is people who just, that's their experience of these sorts of stories is games. Yeah. They haven't read any of the older stuff, the stuff that ties into what you were talking about, Dave, that there's centuries of human experience and tradition that go into some of these ideas, but they haven't really read much of anything. They've just played games, and that's warped their idea of how these stories are supposed to work.
Yeah, and so I want to come back to something Coop said here, but Pete, I think that's absolutely right. Is lack of contact. Their only experience is games. This is the gamification of magic. I mean, the interesting thing is, right? So it turns out if you go out and you make statements about magic and you're non-judgmental and you are discoverable on the internet talking about it, people come to you, and what I mean is people come to me and they say, this is my practice. This is what I do. And I will tell you, water dowsing is not a thing your great-grandfathers did. It's a thing some of your neighbors do, right? Or like...
My Uncle Henry used to witch for water before he'd dig a well. I personally think it's bunk, but people still do it, so I don't know.
people do it today, and water companies do it today to discover leaks in pipes, right? And and people, like, again, you can think what you want about it, right? But my point is, if like it's not gone, it's just that I think the people, the large number, the mass media consumers of this stuff are not seeing it. That it's still people around them who are doing these things. And so they're that's right. They're replicating something like a D&D or a Magic the Gathering experience in a novel. And I find that personally very tedious, aside from the fact that the
I
power's
think
all gone.
a lot of magic from like folklore is really kind of tame compared to stuff in modern fantasy too. It was very subtle. It was very, it wasn't as over the top. You didn't have people shooting lightning bolts at each other.
Yeah.
Go with the memes. So,
So that's
it kind of depends on what you want to do. Personally, I'm not that interested in a setting where people could shoot lightning bolts at each other. So
that's true. If you go read spell books, like real spell books, which now, like, look, 30 years ago, it's hard to find this stuff, is not anymore, right? It's just on Amazon. So, but you go read, or something like the Grimoire of Arthur Gauntlet, or the Long
Abermalion Protocol.
And what you'll find is, to Mike's point, it's not fireballs and flying. That's not what people mostly had spells for, because they didn't mostly need to cast fireballs and fly, right? So what do they have spells for? Well, to do stuff that they actually needed done, like heal the sick cow, or make that girl fall in love with me, or drive customers to my business, right? So yeah, magic, like historic, or find water, right?
Also stuff that maybe wasn't super obvious when it didn't work, so people wouldn't know that you were a charlatan immediately.
I mean, that's a whole nother big discussion.
Like if you could say you could shoot fireballs and then you can't shoot a fireball, people are going to know.
Right. It's an interesting discussion to think about. Like, okay, why do people go to the village magician, the village cunning man in England, right? Like they thought he could solve the problem, right? They thought it worked. So that's an interesting conversation about kind of why.
And you still see this. There are still tarot card shops. And
Sure.
It's always been hilarious to me, because tarot was legitimately a playing card deck. It's like if I pulled out the ace of spades and said, all right, now I can mind control you. It's
they didn't
a deck of playing cards.
Before they gamified magic, they magicified the game.
Yeah, they turned it into.
Yeah, that's actually what they did. It was like Coop's saying, tarot was a card game in the late Middle Ages, if I remember.
Does that make it like Yu-Gi-Oh? Then?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like they're throwing like trap cards and shit.
That's
fucking monsters coming out of nowhere.
But
it's like, imagine 200-300 years from now, people are actually using Magic the Gathering cards as magical
to tell your fortune.
stuff. Like,
yeah.
The Coop, I love the point you make, where you said, hey, if by analogy with like an MMA fight, right? You can create game statistics for two MMA fighters, and you could like play out a game between them. But like that's an abstraction. That's not really what's going on, right?
right.
I think that's actually a great example. Like if somebody said, "Oh, I'm a novelist, but I'm not soft physics. I'm hard physics." So as I'm writing, my character is going up the hill. Oh, he's consuming a lot of calories. He's starting to feel weak. He doesn't have enough. He stops and eat a strawberry for 500 calories. He can go. You wouldn't be like, "Oh, that's genius." You'd think he's a pervert. He's a moron, right? And yet,
when you said soft physics, all I'm thinking is like that's what anime is.
Yeah.
Just doing stuff that shouldn't be possible, but
whatever looks fun in the animation. Yeah. But I think that's right. I think that's right. Like it's ridiculous to treat magic. You wouldn't treat a fight this way, right? You would just describe the perceptions of the people in the fight. Yeah, absolutely. So here's another way to think about it, and I don't know how long you guys wanted to hear me bitch about this one subject, but I'm going to take one more step.
Go nuts.
So So I recently read this book by Ian McGilchrist called The Master and His Emissary, which is about left-right brain divisions. And the first part of the book says, hey, and this is maybe 10 years old. First part of the book says, the division between left and right brain is not quite what you were taught when you were young. We understand it better now. It's not quite what we thought in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, right? And then the second part is actually sort of a cultural critique where he says, we have become overwhelmingly a left brain society. And that's bad for us. In a way, that's kind of like saying we have become a schizophrenic or an autistic society. Okay. So, like, what is the difference? Well, what he describes is the think about a raccoon that's like pulling a fish out of a creek. Okay, it has two different kinds of attention. One kind of attention is the raccoon is paying attention to everything around it, and it can't focus specifically on details, but it's noticing everything, and it's listening for predators, right? And it's noticing the relationships among things in the tree, and there's the uphill part of the stream and the downhill part, and there's another fish jumping, and I hear footsteps behind me, and that's the right brain. The right brain notices everything, and it's everything's relationship to everything, right? And you can't really focus on the right brain, so the left brain focuses. The left brain looks at the fish in the raccoon's hand, and it understands the fish in great and explicit detail, right? But except it doesn't really understand the fish because it can't understand the fish's relationship to anything. That is a right brain function. So what it really does is it's understanding an abstraction of the fish that is practical to allow the raccoon to catch the fish, to tear it open, and to eat it, right? So hard magic is left brain bullshit. Like the whole point of magic, right, in a story is to use analogy to get into that part of your brain that is not conscious, where you see all the relationships among those things, and magic and wonder and analogy are designed to give you surprise insights where you come out learning more about what you can't see all the time. Hard magic says, no, there is nothing there. Don't worry about that. Just look at the abstract image of a fish you have in your hand, right? It is autistic. It is schizophrenic. And I just look forward to the day when they stop. It will not be today, though.
One of the reasons that we kind of look forward to it is because of the effect that it has narratively on the story that you're trying to tell. If something's hard magic, then it's kind of like your characters are now Pokemon that have like set attacks and numbers and stats and all that stuff, and so you can only sort of navigate the conflicts a certain way. Whereas like soft magic, and you see this a lot in the old sword and sorcery stories, because magic was still this mysterious, scary thing that only the people that were really up to no good and kind of reckless about it even dabbled with. Everybody else was like, no, there's danger in that, because you could scry through a fireplace, or it could blow your arm off, or it requires sacrifices and things like that. So it was always something that the evil guy or the neutral witch or sorcerer that the hero came across to, it was something still foreign to the protagonist or the focus of the story, to add an element of danger. Whereas now it's like, okay, well, go to magic school and ace your magic finals, and now you're a magician and you can fight the other magic people in the magic fighting ring.
There's
apparently wanted to go to a school where you wore English style uniforms, weirdos.
Well, that goes into what I was saying with like the mysterious foreign thing. Those are just British, though, and not magic.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple thoughts. One, there is also a perversion of narrative. So I was on a panel at FanX last year called Hard Magic versus Soft Magic, right? And I was like the only one maintaining my point of view. Fortunately, I'm comfortable disagreeing with everybody, right? So I was having this conversation, but as a debate with like 5 other people, right? And someone from the audience raised his hand and said, "Well, I just don't understand. If you don't use hard magic, then what what is the mystery that's revealed at the climax of the book?" And I said, anything else,
Whatever
anything.
the book is about.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
fantasy novel does not have to be. Oh, I now understand the magic system. That's such a ridiculously narrow. How about now I know who my father is, right?
Yeah.
Or how,
I don't really read fantasy, so I didn't even know that was a thing. Is that like a trope where they
It's apparently.
play the magic system?
it's very
I
typically
think Sanderson started it, and
yes.
I've actually seen submission guidelines. I don't remember the publisher, but they wanted, if it was fantasy, they wanted an outline of your magic system with the submission.
Yeah, which there are 2 things you can do to get me to immediately reject your novel, and one of them is hard magic. The wizard was Kaiser. See, that would be a great revelation, right? The wizard was Kaiser Soze the whole time.
But that's because Kaiser Soze is interesting, not the wizardry.
It's not his magic, right? It's not the magic system. So I think one of the things about a reaction, the second reaction to what you were saying, Coop, right, is classically sword and sorcery. Like, what makes a novel sword and sorcery? Well, first of all, the point of view characters are sword. They are not sorcerers, right? Like Conan is not a sorcerer. Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser are not sorcerers, right? They're the swordsmen. So that means the magic can always stay mysterious and ominous and threatening, because who does it? The bad guys. And if like some relatively friendly wizard is going to help you, man, there's always a catch. There's always something in there that's going to,
Yeah, like I said, they're generally neutral at best.
yes.
Like, it's somebody that the hero comes across and they're not immediately opposed to. So it's like, look, if I help you out with this, or you hate the villain just as much as I do, so point me in the right direction or something. Do your little augury thing, and then that.
Yeah.
It's never
Even,
just, hey,
even
I
Merlin was even Merlin was a secondary character.
Right.
Well, especially if you go to the books, like the movies, and where we get our modern cultural sense of Merlin. He's this huge figure,
Sure.
mainly because of Excalibur. But which got like back in the original stories, like he disappeared really early in the books.
Yeah, mainly because
really early in the story.
Mainly because he wasn't perfect, and he got tricked and got trapped under a lake for like
In the
5
Mui's
centuries.
cave.
He was simping too hard.
So I
Big time.
don't know the numbers, and I don't want to exaggerate, but it seems to me like there's a resurgence of interest in sword and sorcery as a genre. And I suspect, maybe I hope, maybe I want to believe that some of that's a reaction against hard magic. Like, this has just gotten dumb, that it's right. Like, we need to get back to, no, the hero is being heroic. It's not about figuring out how the magic works.
I think that's also a reason that sword and sorcery is coming back, is because people want to see heroic heroes that they're flawed, but they're not like laden with the flaws to the point where it's just, you know, they can't do anything cool because they're so flawed and deep and tragic and all that stuff. But at the same time, they're not like the Mary Sue, that like they don't face any challenges whatsoever, which is why you have them be the sword versus a sorcery.
Right.
And everybody wants to play the game where you're the sorcerer fighting like 1,000 swordsmen, but nobody wants to read that book.
Right. And this, by the way, is exactly the other thing that will cause me to immediately reject your novel, is grimdark. Like, I am so tired of being like, oh, it's all gray. Oh, is it all gray? Is it all gray? Because, like, there's the guy who kidnaps the children and the guy who rescues them. Is that gray? Or can we actually say there's a hero? I think we can say there's a hero.
So, I mean, I've had this conversation with Pete and Mike before, and my theory is that when gray morality done well, it's when the morality itself is actually pretty black and white, but the methods that you go to enact that morality are gray, where you're not choosing the perfect solution every time, or there is collateral damage. but the ends and the intentions do matter. That's what makes it morality. So
I like that. Look, I think that's realistic. That choice is compromised, right? Like it's rarely, as an adult, it's rarely, not never, but you're rarely like, do I choose the good thing or the bad thing? Like it's that's not what it is, right? It's I have complicated choices and I got to figure out. There's
I can do the right thing, but there is a huge personal cost to that.
Right. But if you're like trying to make me root for the guy sleeping with his sister, like that's not what you're doing. You're trying to
Whatever are you talking
notion
about?
of heroism. Yeah, people can't be heroic. Look, isn't
So
this
I'll wait for the 8th book to come out.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Keep waiting. I think part of the reason that I have a theory that part of the reason this gamification, I guess, of magic systems has come about is because as an author, when you're world building, you have to set yourself rules of what and limitations for what these characters can do and the limitations on their powers. So you're not just pulling things out of your ass, right? But the thing is, you don't have to explain all that to the reader, and it kind of ruins it if you do, right? You don't have to tell the reader everything. You can have your own little set of notes, and you don't show that to them. Save that for you. So, but you got to have some rules because otherwise it ends up being like a Dragon Ball Z fight where the two characters just keep getting more and more powerful with some new thing that you've never heard of before, and then.
Well, even Dragon Ball Z had those fucking the scouters. It was like, oh, his power level is 9.33,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
Which
so
again is more of the bullshit that we've been complaining about for the last half.
Oh yeah, and then that series just completely abandoned it because it was like, this is stupid and we have no idea what it means. So
just like
yeah,
Star
like
Wars
midichlorians.
Like where did that one line go? Did it ever show up anywhere else? I don't know, right?
Fortunately, not that I know of.
Right. Like
granted, Star Wars is dead anyway, but that's a whole
Star
other
Wars
conversation.
Star Wars committed a gory, bloody suicide.
Star Wars didn't kill it; its owner did.
Okay.
So if you're trying to write a fantasy story with magic in it, what I'm saying is establish some limits for the magic, but maybe keep that under your hypothetical hat or your actual hat if you're wearing a tricorn.
But even like Star Wars is a perfect example. Everybody until the Disney movies, everybody kind of knows what the limitations of the Force are, and it's not because they set out the rule book for you. It's because it's very impressive when Yoda moves an entire X-wing from the swamp.
Showed it instead of explaining it.
Right.
Yep.
But there's no rule. It's like, okay, a powerful Force, a 7th level Force user can only lift so many pounds, in this condition or anything like that. And he can only do it this far. And he has to use these amount of action points and this amount of MP or anything like that. Or it's like you have to go through this school and then you're able to levitate stuff. But this school, you're able to use lightning. But they never go through that. They know that, hey, it hurts when you're shocked by lightning. And that's kind of painful. That sounds like something a Sith would do. So guess what? The Sith is the guy that uses the Force lightning. Force pushing, you can easily do that as an extension of if you physically push somebody, but you're not next to them and touching them. Moving a big object like an X-Wing is very impressive because it takes the master to do it. And our main character who has used the Force before is impressed by that. That's how you stay consistent with that. Everybody kind of knows what the limits of the Force are, but it's never explained.
And the way it was presented in the original 3 films, it seemed kind of intuitive, Yeah. You could grab and move things if they were within a certain radius. It was never explained, but it seemed reasonable, as reasonable as something like that could be, It didn't.
The farther away it is, the harder it is to move it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because again, takes that much more calories. So
what that kind of boils down to is something that, again, that left brain that you were talking about, Dave, can't quite accept, and that's mystery.
Right. And that's what magic's all about, right? It's you're sending out like it's analogy and it's fable and it's wonder to try to find those things that are out there in your field of attention that are in your right brain that your left brain can't see.
It literally means secret knowledge. That's the etymology of magic. So.
Yeah.
And to some extent, I mean, combination of the wider awareness, and it's not even a matter of magic, but just doing. I've done a few tactical tracking courses, and you start to get to the point where your subconscious is picking up those indicators faster than your conscious brain can. So you can be following a track at a run, and somebody who hasn't been doing this for a while is like, "What the hell are you looking at?" Well, there's a broken branch there. There's a track through the grass there, but you might not necessarily be able to say that as you're going. It's just, okay, he's there, and there's his next trace. There's the next trace. There's the next trace, and you keep going.
Picking up that spoor.
So this is a little scary, and I don't want to like say it to my kids, but like I have realized that sometimes I drive a little bit like that. Like I will realize I'm driving fine, but actually like it's not my left brain. I'm not focused on the road, right? Like actually it's the rest of my consciousness that's just getting me through. And like there's the moment when something happens to the car in front of me breaks, like then I focus and I'm often startled myself, right? So yeah, that's our own. I mean, our own consciousnesses are somewhat mysterious to us, right? Our brain is doing a lot that we're not seeing.
Yeah, but imagine gamifying that, because yes, everybody has that the sort of peripheral sense while they're driving.
Richer senses.
It's generally all on muscle memory. But muscle memory, like they never apply muscle memory to whatever sort of magic system or presence in their stories. Because when you first learned how to drive, you weren't not paying attention. You were doing everything, and it was that much harder. Yeah, you knew every twitch on the wheel, like especially if you learned manual, like where your foot is on the clutch and that stuff. Like some people have to look down and see which gear they're shifting into. Like you were paying attention to everything, but as you did more and more of it and got used to it, it's all like the background processes in your brain is doing all that work for you. Nobody really applies that to casting spells or whatever. Like it's always a distinct action to do something in whatever magic system there is. Like they have to everybody wants to have like this graphic glowing circle of runes that just appear in the air. I guess because it looks cool, but it usually doesn't mean
99% of it's aesthetics.
Yeah, but here's the thing: when you're in a literary form and you're describing that, I'm just like, that means nothing.
Right.
You just did Final Fantasy VII attack, like that's it. But
you're just asking Hollywood producers to see it visually and write you a check.
But nobody really approaches it like, okay, an experienced mage or wizard or sorcerer, it's not that they've hit the different levels or they've learned new techniques. It's like it goes back to the martial arts analogy.
Yeah.
The best martial artist is not the guy that knows every technique. Is the one that can do the really effective 3 or 4 techniques really well, and there's no defense against it because he's just that quick on it. You know,
he's not even thinking about it because
it's like the driving thing. When you first learn to fight, like you're thinking of everything. When you're at that level where you're doing professional fighting and that stuff, they've been doing it for years, and so it is muscle memory. They're quicker on the reflexes. They're quicker to block. They're quicker to strike. They're noticing things that they're not actively noticing and capitalizing on that because it's at that muscle memory. Nobody really translates that to a wizard fight, I guess. I don't know.
I love that 90s Delta video with AC/DC in the background. There's one part in that where the dude is running up range at a dead sprint, dropping targets with a pistol. And he doesn't stop for any one of them. That's a degree of shooting that most people will never get to. But again, I guarantee you, he's not thinking about it. He's barely even looking at the sights.
Oh, you mean he's not using a shooting system?
No, because again, there's that. He's got those neural pathways built from thousands of reps, so his subconscious is basically taken over at that point.
Yeah.
All his rep brain is doing.
I don't have enough intelligence points to understand this conversation, guys. So
Yeah.
That's super interesting, and it gets I think that's a really interesting idea for writing a story or a book about a wizard. That is really provocative. But actually, I think it also kind of gets into the like a writer typically is an expert in nothing, right? Like a writer typically.
Speak for yourself.
It's other than Mike Cooper, who's an expert in everything. But the rest of us tend to be, or expert in one or two things, right? But you have to write a book about so many things, and any book includes many things you're not really expert in. And I wonder if that's sort of an artifact of the amateur researcher trying to describe what an expert does. Like the expert just does it because the expert has done it 10,000 times before, and like it all feels right in his hands. He doesn't think about it, right? He knows what the right tool is when he looks at it, right? But the writer doesn't feel that, and the writer doesn't feel comfortable describing that. So the writer says, well, we selected the 16 millimeter, and right, and describes what the expert maybe would never perceive, because for the expert it's just it's muscle memory, it's the unconscious mind, it's passive intelligence doing it.
I think in that sense, writers are always like, growing up, like whenever you learn a new skill, or at least like begin learning a new skill, there's this part of your imagination that is thinking up ways that you can utilize it to, help somebody or save the day and earn accolades and all that stuff. So it's like, oh, I just learned how to design a website in HTML. Guess what? I'm going to save the school, community center and the computer lab with my web design skill. It's just something stupid like that. Yeah. And so I think writers hold on to that a little bit. So whenever they go research something, they'll get like the surface level understanding of it, and then immediately have to go put that in a book.
Well,
And
they want to show their work,
Or they're a writer who is an expert in something, and that is the entire point of that book, is to just show how smart they are at that one subject.
Depending on how it's done, sometimes it can work, and sometimes it can be cringe as hell.
Yeah.
And Tom Clancy was both.
But yeah. Before we try and move on to another subject, how everybody always says like magic and technology are completely indistinguishable from each other if they're sufficiently advanced? How come we don't see, like in movies or any visual medium, like magic being utilized the same cringy, non-realistic way that like hacking was in movies, where it's like you have to go into cyberspace and fight, space invaders to hack this program. If you're like trying to mind control somebody, now you have to like fight. Like, you know what? Never mind. Inception did that.
You don't want to have to face Allah on the astral plane.
Yeah. But it's like stuff like magic spells aren't a mini game in these stories,
There is one other thing I want to bring up on the gamification of some of these stories. It doesn't just fall into the magic system part. Character classes. I friggin' hate character classes in novels. Like I run into like, so the barbarian did this. Do you know what a barbarian actually is? It's those people over there who say bar because they don't speak your language.
Exactly right.
I do like how that word came from basically the Greeks doing the whole babidi baba, like Team America.
Exactly
right. You know what a barbarian is? Yeah, Italians?
Yes.
Yes. To the Greeks, the Romans were barbarians. To the Romans, the Greeks were barbarians. To both of them, the Persians were barbarians, and vice versa.
If you ask anybody from any country in Asia, every other country in Asia is a bunch of uncultured savages. They're barbarians who are beneath them. You know, that's why no two countries in Asia have a friendly border.
Yep.
That just means that they all have the rage function. They can tank major damage, bro.
That's right. D12 hit
And
dice.
And again, it's like,
But a lot of that comes from the archetype of Conan the Barbarian too. You know, he was a big, strong
Which then
guy.
got- which
People
then
don't
got
know that Conan
gamified.
was actually like clever in the books, and he was a good thief, and that he was, you know, a
Yeah.
tactician. And
He was king.
He was a
And he was
Renaissance
a
man.
pirate.
Bro.
Right. Yeah, I do.
I mean, Cole before him was just as much of a barbarian, and Cole was something of a philosopher as well as a king. So,
Yeah, I do think there is something to that. There's so my sense is I'm probably a few years older than you guys, but like not a lot of years older. I have to tell you from my perspective, like the way that D&D went from being the thing that got my friends' parents angry at me and I was not allowed to play with their kids because I was the dangerous bad influence, right? To like conquering the culture so that Hollywood actors will like take national TV programs into their D&D rooms. Like that's astonishing.
Yeah, and you know how they did that is because they changed it from a role-playing game to improv theater for Critical Role fans.
Yeah, well, for sure, that's been a big influence in the last. I don't know how old Critical Role is, 6 years or something like that.
Not as old as 5e.
Yeah, but like even before that, right? Like when Barnes and Noble started carrying this stuff, right? Which was, man, you had to go to like this weird little dirty, broken down, hole in the wall store when I was a kid that might also have like National Lampoon in it or something. It's one step away from porn.
In the last 20 years, a lot of what used to be like the underground nerd culture stuff, it got discovered, it got monetized, and it went mainstream. You know, comic book conventions used to be like a thing that nerds went to, and like the local paper would do a story on them, like, oh, let's go make fun of the freaks, you know. Now, like New York and San Diego Comic Con are these huge multi-million-dollar events, you know, and Dragon Con is humongous too. I don't want to say it ruined it because that's not true, you know, but it definitely changed the landscape of culture, and it made some of it got a little bit insufferable now. I mean, it's just what happens when something that was kind of a subculture just gets gobbled up by the corporate mainstream.
Yeah.
All right, I have a very inflammatory theory about this.
Okay.
Which got the
Coop inflammatory? No.
The rise in popularity with like the nerdy role-playing games correlates directly with the rise of fanfiction.net.
Oh, interesting.
Because now, you had this generation of creepy people who really want to put their spin on a story, and they need to find an audience. So if you can get a group of people that can't leave because it's either your house or you carpooled there, or everybody has planned to be here for 3 hours or whatever,
or they're locked in your basement, yeah,
and make them listen to your cringe story, that is a powerful opportunity for you. So
it's so interesting. I wonder if there is. This is not even a theory. This is like a
historical
question.
Recounting.
This is just fact. No, and one of the things we've seen in the last 100 years is the steady decay of our civil society, right? So a person used to belong to many kinds of organizations. You belong to your local business organization, and maybe you were a Mason and you were in a bowling club and you went to church and you did lots of stuff, right? And a lot of that's just going away, like doesn't exist, or fewer and fewer people do it. And to some extent it's being replaced by just passively consuming national mass media, right? We don't bring our neighbors into our homes anymore and make music for them, or if you do, you're a weirdo, right? We all just have Spotify. And I wonder if fanfic and role playing games both are for certain people a way to try to retain or to replace that lack of civil society. Right? I don't interact with my neighbors anymore.
It is because people.
Maybe Ryan English's comment before the one that's highlighted is probably more accurate than mine, but I still like mine more because it's more shameful.
Interesting. Video games turn out to be really fun. Yeah, maybe.
Also, video games became like the technology improved to the point where video games were more accessible for more people. You didn't have to go into DOS.
Well, that and Halo. Once the quarterback was playing video games rather than going out on dates with the cheerleaders all like started to take a look at what was going on, what was more important than them, and that brought in an entire new side to the video game culture.
One mediocre first-person shooter changed gaming forever.
Well, see, here's the thing:
It was more palatable than Doom.
Yeah, Halo is not a first-person shooter. Halo is a party game that you play in first person. It's like everybody played the story, sure, but a lot of times they did that on co-op, or they had their friends in for 4-person split screen multiplayer, or they were doing LAN, and then Xbox Live, you could do it online. It was a party game that had a decently written single player mode attached to it.
But Dave's on to something here, and you see that beyond like cultural niches, like subcultures and everything. As an amateur internet zoologist of fringe weirdos, you see this in a lot of like these weird fringe political movements too. There are a lot of alienated, isolated people out there who.
I know you said fringe, but I heard French, and it still makes sense.
They might be French. I don't know.
These damn French cultural movements have been a blight on our society for centuries.
Like Art Nouveau, come on, guys. Enough is enough. But, they don't have, people don't go to church that much anymore. They don't have like extended families that they live near anymore. Nobody stays in their hometown anymore once they grow up. I mean, I'm in like my 4th state in the last decade. Everyone moves around because that's the way the modern economy works. You move around a lot chasing jobs.
Yep.
Well, they did that during the Depression and the Dust Bowl too, but their video games sucked. So
they did. All the graphics were sepia tone.
Yeah.
People don't. Unions are not that much of a thing anymore. People don't join organizations like the Elks or the fraternal lodges. Women don't have their little sewing club groups anymore. It's all of those things that people did to socialize with one another are pretty much gone. And in their wake, we didn't replace them with anything after college. Maybe you go out for beers with your coworkers, and if you don't like your coworkers, then what? Like, what do you do?
Well, it depends. Is it the post office?
So I think this drives a lot of people, especially younger people, into some of it drives into subcultures. Some of it drives into sketchier subcultures like furries. And some of it drives into fringe politics. That's how a lot of these people end up in groups like Antifa, I think, and some of the ones on the right wing too. They want to belong to something. They want to feel like they matter to somebody. So they find a group that will accept them. Even if it's just an anonymous online thing where they just tweet racist memes, they feel like on some level they're part of something. It's something they're not getting anywhere else in society. And that's really sad.
Well, it's also
really sad.
It's not just that those community groups went away and got replaced by like Discord servers or something like that. They got supplanted by the Discord servers and the online communities and stuff like that. And we see that, excuse me, we see that in declining rates of like risky social behavior. Like kids these days are way less likely to have teenage pregnancies, drug use, getting kidnapped or any of that stuff, like all the risky behavior that like the 80s and 90s, went rampant on, are in decline. And that's because kids don't have to go out and meet with other people beyond parental supervision to socialize with other people. They can do it from their room over the internet through a computer screen. So it's not so much that the internet filled a void, it's that the internet supplanted what our previous forms of socialization were.
And I think the argument can be made that it's an incomplete sort of socialization that has left some holes.
Yeah. Well, because it's not just socialization, it's parasocialization, which is why, like, I get it. We're on YouTube, but we're not YouTubers, right? It's like where instead of finding a circle of people that their opinion matters to you, you can go online and start reviewing video games. And if you're attractive enough as a girl, like tons of people will show up for that immediate validation. And it's all faceless and it's all anonymous. And so there's this parasocial dynamic going on that has replaced a conventionally social dynamic. So.
Yeah, which is an environment which is manipulated, right? The internet is manipulated by you and me, users, the way we present ourselves. But actually, there's a lot darker manipulation than that going on, right?
Yeah, your church group didn't have an algorithm. So.
It didn't have an algorithm. It didn't. The great thing about it was,
didn't it, Dave? Didn't it?
That's a conspiracy theory, Mike. Shut up.
But also, if you were like a plumber, you went to church and the banker was there, right? Like you socialized across kind of classes and across occupations. The internet algorithms actually force you together into groups that all like the same stuff. It's isolating. So I think it is parasocializing. And then there's an interesting theme here, like that kind of runs through a lot of what was said too, which is narrative, right? I mean, playing D&D, playing like video games got narratively really much more sophisticated than they used to be, right? Like Galaga or something. Pew, 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 pew.
But that goes a lot back to what Mike was saying, where the technology allowed for it. Because when you had a 24 kilobyte floppy to tell your story on, it was a lot different than now that you have a 17 gig video game that you can download.
Right.
And then it has to download a 5 gig patch before you can even start playing it on launch day.
So. Right. But it's not just better graphics. It's more sophisticated stories, right? I think Coop even we're talking about Halo, and you said people are, I can't remember if you said playing the story or participating in the story, or right.
At a certain point, it became not just for kids anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, Halo. I mean, I was bagging on it for being a mediocre first-person shooter, and it was. But
it's a mediocre first-person shooter. It's the first game. Is a pretty okay military sci-fi story.
But yes, it had a story that it took seriously. It had a story that made sense. That
banging soundtrack.
That it wasn't like Quake where there wasn't a story.
Yeah, it wasn't an arena shooter, and you could play it on a console instead of having to spend $300 to upgrade your PC just to run it. So,
yeah.
What?
Interesting.
So, Dave, what else were we gonna? Oh, you are now an editor for Baen. Is that correct? Is that true? I've heard of
that. Is correct. Yes.
Tell us about.
We can lay that controversy to rest.
Tell us what about the world of trad pub, as the kids call it these days.
Oh man.
Otherwise known as getting your book published for real. Like, what does it take? What do you got to do to submit? What is Baen looking for these days? What?
Yeah. So if you don't know Baen, it's a science fiction and fantasy publisher. It's a very common question to ask. What are you looking for? And it's a reasonable question, but it turns out there's not a good answer. because look, when you are self-publishing and you are doing what's so-called writing to market, where you say, hey, there's like a market that's Amazon's rankings indicate that there's consistently a group of people out here who want certain things. Okay. And maybe it's military science fiction. Maybe it's much more specific than that. Maybe it's reverse harem with shifters or whatever. Right. Like that audience is clearly looking for those things. And you kind of can figure out, well, what are the things they want in that book? And I'm just going to keep producing those books. Right. And that's fine. Right. I have no criticism of that.
I'm not calling you a liar, but I'm looking at your face.
I'm not equally a fan of all those genres. Some of those genres I respect more than others. But
there's some gross stuff out there. I'm gonna go ahead.
You mean you're not a fan of lit RPG, which basically covers the entire topic we just had?
I have a book that is lit RPG, but it's also not lit RPG, and like that's a part of it that I struggled with.
Okay. Yeah. For those in the audience and those of us participating in the chat who don't know what lit RPG is, what is lit RPG?
Let me answer the question that just popped up. You might get a hard magic grimdark novel. Well, actually, I don't think you'll get a grimdark novel past Toni Weisskopf. I think she's not going to publish grimdark, period. So, yeah, I wouldn't send that to us. We might publish hard magic, but like, don't give that to me. Give that to somebody else. Your chances are better. So, lit RPG, there are some genres that are in which the story contains game elements that are intrinsically part of the story. Okay, so think about movies like Tron or Jumanji, right? Where like a normal organic human being goes into a game, right? A video game like Tron or a board game like Jumanji.
Like Captain N, yes.
Yeah. So there are probably lit RPG aficionados who are going to be like enraged at my loose and dirty definition here. But in the lit RPG,
you don't even know what it is.
I know. So, but I do. So, lit RPG usually, I think, means that your point of view character is in a game. He may have come from the real world or a real world and somehow entered a game like Tron, or maybe he is just in a game, period. And the game statistics matter. So, Coop, this is kind of like actually the following the logic of hard magic all the way out in other parts of the the narrative, right? Oh, I should have stats for the MMA fighter. So I'm gonna have a chapter where he fights the orcs. Whoa! And then, I just earned 72 experience points. What am I gonna do with them? I'm gonna raise my strength by 1, and I'm gonna learn a new judo hold and add 1 to my move. Right?
Isn't that crazy? Where like you can just hack something to death enough times with a sword and then get better at lockpicking.
Yes. Well, yes. This is the logic of D&D, right? Yep. Or you can find gold because you got experience points for gold too. So I found 500 gold, and now I can move quietly better.
Oh, that's old school. That's like 2E at latest.
Yes. Well, that's true. Yes. So I'm playing in an OSR campaign we just started with my group. So the most recent gaming I've done, I'm a level 8 cleric, and most of the experience we just earned was for a bunch of money. So.
Yeah, that's just what I definitely want to read about a protagonist and his THACO score and
right. Yes. So yes. So look. But on a point of writing to market, right? So lit RPG is an example where you figure out what do lit RPG readers want, and I'm going to write to that. Baen's not actually looking for that. It seems like we would, but for at least a couple reasons. One is our process is much slower, so we can't generate a book in a month and put it out. It takes us longer to edit the book. We go through several rounds of editing, but also we have a sales process where we're talking to Simon and Schuster, who does the distribution for us, and they're selling to bookstores, and it just takes a relatively long period of time. How long? Well, if you take out the sort of query part, like assume you're Mike Coopery and you're inside the fold already, and Mike, yeah, and Mike shows up with a novel, right? Mike shows up with a manuscript. He's like, here it is. It's like Lost in Space, but everyone has a dog's head, and the book is done, right? Like probably it takes us about a year to get that book out.
How did you?
I could actually see Mike doing that though, but like as a joke.
Well, not now.
Mike turns around, dumps some of this stack of notes this tall in the trash.
Cross that one out. Gosh damn it.
So we don't chase trends because we can't chase trends is one reason, right? Because if we see like, oh man, boom, suddenly there's an explosion in, vampire romance or dystopia or something. Well, by the time we get a book out, like find a book and get it out, like probably the trend is gone. So we don't even try.
So it's like a Simpsons episode where it's like 9 months after the fact, where it's like South Park was putting it out that week.
Right. Absolutely.
I think these days, like those literary trends don't last for years like it did like 15 years ago. Remember when there was a whole section of teen paranormal romance in the bookstore trying to get some of that Twilight money for like 4 or 5 years, and then it just died?
Yep.
I don't think that happens anymore. It comes and it goes in a matter of months or within a year at least.
Yeah. Well, and the other reason why we're not really looking for anything is because we actually we want to publish what the writer wants to write. We want to do it for the art. Like, would we like to make money? Of course. Do we have to make money long term to stay in business? Of course. But we don't want a writer to be like, man, what I really want to write is he's mad again. I really want to write this urban fantasy about leprechauns and the MMA fighter who gets into the world of the leprechaun arena. But what's hot right now is zombie romance, so I'm going to write that. Like, we actually don't want to encourage that guy to write zombie romance. We want him to write.
The leprechaun thing was Mike's idea. That's why he left. So he's got plausible deniability.
Dave's stealing all my ideas. So
I wasn't even there when he said it.
Yeah. So we want people to give us the books that they love. Now, like that they wrote from their heart, right? Now there are some things that those books have to, like we have I say we, but like here really, Toni Weisskopf, okay, who was the editor-in-chief, like she has a vision, she has like a brand, she has a taste. Like there is a kind of thing we want to publish, and other things that don't fall into that, generally speaking, we're not going to publish them. And you can kind of reduce that to a handful. As I count them off, I'll remember whether it's kind of 4 or 5. But science fiction and fantasy, okay. So like, not interested in horror. Hates steampunk, okay. Sci-fi and fantasy, adventure story, okay. So if it's like a long, talky story with two people debate politics. Unless you're like an established writer with her who sells a lot, like it's probably not a good fit for us, right? An adventure story, people having duels with laser swords or whatever. And it's got to be decent humans, respectable, like, protagonists who are, morally decent human beings. Like, you could be Han Solo, right? You could be like a lovable scoundrel, but you should be no more gray than that. Trying to accomplish heroic ends by morally acceptable means, right? So what does Toni want? She wants adventure stories that are not about anti-heroes, that are not about people who are reluctantly forced to commit massacres, right?
So no Russian, huh?
Yeah, who are like, sleeping with their sister, right? Like
what an odd thing to say.
Yeah, like just to pick a random example. Basically, heroes doing heroic stuff, having an adventure on the way, either with swords and magic or with ray guns and spaceships, right? Like that's what it is. And you'd be surprised like how many books get submitted that fail to do that.
I mean, basically, to sum up the criteria is it's got to be fun.
Oh yeah. Or another way to think about it is like it should be pro-human. Like you can't be like a hardcore misanthrope wants everybody to die, right? Like a fun, upbeat adventure story.
So that's why none of your books have been picked up for movie deals with Disney, then, huh?
That's correct. We're too pro-human.
The Dead Six books that I wrote with Larry, those were pretty dark, but there was still, there was still morality to them. There was still, a character arc. It wasn't what I would call grim dark. Grim dark is started off as a joke, making fun of how silly Warhammer 40K was.
Well, Warhammer 40K started out as a joke about the grimdark genre, if you will. Like that's the reason that it's so ridiculous, is because they originally were making fun of how everything that was being released in that time period was just hamming the edge on like real hard. And so they were just like, we're going to do it more than you. We're going to do it crazier than you. And we are going to commit to this by any means necessary to show you how ridiculous it is. But they had some badass art attached to it. So it picked up real fast.
Yeah. So the ships travel through interstellar space by passing through hell.
Yeah. Well, it's right there in the opening line, in the grim, dark future of the 39th millennium, or the 41st millennium. Yeah. There is only war. Like, that's the entire point of that thing, is to just be like, this is the grimmest, darkest thing ever. Their orcs are soccer hooligans. Okay. Like, they have an entire army of xenomorphs. They have zombie mummies. It's all there.
They have zombie mummy Terminators.
Yeah.
Because if there was a science fiction property in the 80s or 90s, they ripped it off immediately. And now
Warhammer Fantasy, which is we're just going to rip off like countries in the medieval era and just apply that to, it's always the theme park version. It's like walking through a haunted house exhibit in an amusement park. It's like, well, you got to have the guy with the chainsaw show up. Like, but it's like even the elves, they were just like, all right, how can we have this old wise race of immortal, long-lived fantasy elves? How can we make it so that all of their problems are their fault and it's terrible to be them? So, but then they started going off the rails and started suing people for like using pauldrons or
Space Marine.
Yeah.
Space Marine. Yeah.
They're allowed to steal everything, but you're not allowed to steal anything.
Right. Exactly.
Not to mention that a lot of their writers have gone completely gone the way of just about every other professional stable of writers lately. Not quite as far off the rails as Disney, but close.
Yeah. Dave, you set us off because Pete and I can talk about this all day. But
it's either that or Tolkien. Oh my God!
Every time they try to add to the story, they just make it worse, and not in the grimdark way, but in like the quality way,
the stupid way.
Yeah,
it's like, oh wow, that's a detail that didn't need to exist, and I didn't need to know about.
What if the Emperor had a girlfriend?
Yeah, no, that's basically it. They turned this very interesting crusade to find all the lost, Primarchs into like a custody battle between the Emperor and his ex-wife.
See, I dropped it before we got that far, so.
Ouch. Just ouch.
I just keep hearing it. They just keep piling more cringe on since I lost interest.
I mean, that's a franchise that can only succeed by not taking itself too seriously, right? I mean, you have like Space Marines with like chainsaws, right? Like you can't take yourself too seriously. The whole thing is a joke, right? It's a fun joke. It's
and
over
yet
the top.
it does. But the thing is it's a valuable IP that has so much potential. Like the what is it, the guy who rebelled against the emperor, I can't remember.
Horus.
Yeah, the Horus Heresy. That's got like 60 books in that.
Yeah, and they got worse and worse as it went on.
But it was just they just milked it, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
There-
it's the people that don't take it seriously. All right, the key to success with Warhammer 40K is the characters in the story need to take it deadly seriously.
Yes. for sure.
Yeah.
You as a reader should not, because you're just inundated with how ridiculous this stuff is. Like, okay, this one guy in power armor and a normal sword just killed like 50 demons in a row just through the power of rage. Like, that is a very silly concept, but they're supposed to make it entertaining. Now that guy is fighting 50 demons with just a sword and a suit of power armor that's 1,000 years old. He needs to take it seriously. So that's how you create a successful or a workable story inside that universe. But it all started because they were a modeling company, and like, you know, their business model was, we're going to make a magazine with like cool art about this stuff, make up some bonkers ass shit, and sell little toy metal figures. And the nerds who like painting metal figures and rolling dice are going to eat it all up, and they're going to enjoy how ridiculous it is. Enough people kept buying those figures that it was like, okay, these people take it seriously, so we need to make it more serious and more serious and more serious and more serious. But the modelers and the players didn't actually take it seriously. They took the rules seriously because that affected tournament play and things like that. They took the differences in miniatures seriously, because why am I paying, you know, $30 for 5 figures if they're just like the ones I already have? Why would I buy new ones?
And
So
now they're plastic and they're not metal anymore.
Yeah. The fiction was the one thing that they didn't take or the lore is the one thing that they didn't take seriously until it started like really contradicting itself and just becoming stupid. And they were just like, why am I even doing this?
There are some very well told stories in that lore. I mean, Gaunt's Ghosts, at least the first 3 arcs.
Cyphus Cain.
Caiaphas Cain. There's some fantastic stories told in this. And Caiaphas Cain is an example of not taking any of it seriously and still being able to tell a rollicking story.
Caiaphas Cain, I don't know how you pronounce it, but Caiaphas Cain is a masterclass in what we were just talking about, where it's like the characters need to take it deathly seriously. But this is supposed to be a fun romp through the grimmest, darkest universe that, you know, we can imagine. And so it's like, all right, how can you take something that's so ridiculously grim, dark, and edgy and have fun with it? It's Horatio Hornblower in Warhammer 40K. That's what it is. It's an adventure romp. And then you have, what's his name? Eisenhorn, who is the exact opposite, which is like, this is a masochistic exercise in just how terrible this world truly is. So... And then you want to talk about hard magic versus soft magic. Warhammer 40K is a war game that is very rules heavy, and yet it still has the softest of magic, because if you had like numerical stats and rules to the lore, it wouldn't be nearly as frightening and chaotic and horrifying, you know? So you need to have, hey, on the battlefield, that psyker has a 1 toughness, or it's like, you know, he only gets 1 roll for this. But in the lore, he can potentially summon the devil himself of, you know, plagues and shit like that. So
we got off on a tangent, starting with Grimdark and went off into 40K. So
moving along, Dave,
that's awesome.
You're an editor for Baen, right? So you do some editing. What is that like? What is an editor? Tell us about being an editor for a sci-fi fantasy publisher.
So I get to be the internal champion, internal, not eternal, the internal champion for a book and the writer's ally in trying to make the best book he possibly can of his vision, right? So at a kind of a minimal mechanical kind of level, I will read the book and give the author some comments. And I'll have read it in a Word file, so I'll have like put some comments into the Word document, right? Either like notes or just track changes, but also a letter, an editorial letter that says, "Hey, listen, this is great. I loved it. Here's 3 things that are my fave about this book. If it's my book, here are 3 things I would think about changing as you're doing a revision." Right? Kind of the tone the letters usually are. Sometimes it means more than that. Christopher Rocchio, sounds like you guys maybe have had him on, or at least you might know who he is. We're getting his book 6 and 7 of his Sun Eater series, which is great. Um, his previous publisher basically didn't want to. I mean, without getting into details, which he may or may not want to disclose, but basically didn't want to finish the series as he wanted to finish it.
We
right?
had Christopher on a few months ago talking about just that, as a matter of fact.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
Actually, I think it was last
You
one.
can go back and look at the old streams and see what he had to say on it.
Okay, very good. So, I think what I'm going to tell you now is sort of what's happened since then. So, we Tony said, okay, hey, we'll publish you. And in fact, we're working very hard to try to make book 6 and 7 look like they're almost indistinguishable from the previous publisher. It won't be quite there, but in terms of like the page layouts are the same, and the font's the same, and the cover art's the same, and it's going to look dang close. Okay. So I got to be the editor. I am the editor. I get to be the editor, which is great. I had to catch up in the series. I'd read the first 1.5 and then stopped, and I was like, well, shoot. So I went back to the beginning and read 5 pretty fat books, so that I could like give him good feedback. And so one thing I did is I read the book and I gave him a letter, right? Hey, this is great. Here's like 4 things that I'd think about. But another example of an issue we had, and I hope I'm not revealing too much inside baseball here, is the manuscript was long, and I think it's true that it's longer than the length, or in terms of word count, of any other standalone novel we've ever published. And so we had to figure out what to do about that. Right. And so I got to be, I was the champion of the book. So I got to sort of talk with him and say, well, what would be, what's your best outcome here? What would you want us to do? And if that doesn't work, what are, like, planning a negotiation, like what would be acceptable outcomes to you? What are things we just need to avoid at all costs? And having conversations with Tony and saying, hey, how long can this book be? We all agree it needs to be shorter. How much shorter does it need to be? And then kind of negotiating with her. And she's like, well, these books are so long. And I said, well, but we did publish these, which are longer, right? And so Tony and I had kind of a little give and take. And we got to
guys.
Yeah.
Well,
So
that's a very specific genre that he's writing in, though. It's like where the audience kind of expects the doorstopper,
yeah,
lengths.
true. And it will still be big. There is no scenario here where it's not going to be big, right? So we got to an agreed figure, and I think it's okay if I say this, but like the target is 275,000 words, right? And that is a big book. But that's a significantly shorter book than it was in the first draft. So, and that was a good, that was good. Christopher's like, okay, that's an acceptable outcome. By the way, I'm having a baby now, my first baby, and like a lot is going on. And I said, listen, I'm going to do this. I offered, I said, I'm going to read the manuscript again. And I will, I hadn't yet given him my track changes comments, just kind of the letter. And I said, I'm going to read it again, and I'm going to with a yellow highlighter. I'm going to mark everything that if it were me, I would delete to get down to the word count we need to, right? Like I'm going to give a suggested edit. And he said, okay, thanks. Because I think he was just feeling kind of overwhelmed, like didn't know, never had to kind of cut like this in a book. That's not really the kind of editing they gave him in DAW. So I did it. So I will tell you, I do not spend like 2 whole weeks working on most books of Baen. But I did this time. So I went through every page in that manuscript is highlighted, right? I mean, you think of, we said, okay, so the goal is to remove 40,000 words, given 1,100 pages, it's an average of 30 so many words per page. That's like basically 2.5 to 3 lines per page. And so I was going through in every page, like where, 2.5 to 3 lines that I would remove if I had to. And I sent him the whole markup, right? Not that, oh, you must delete these, but like this is just for you to react to and make the decisions about what you want to cut, right? And I got the most recent text from him today. I think he's on track. He's trimming it down. There's no story is going to be removed. The book's not going to feel rhetorically impoverished, right? But there are sometimes the information is in there twice, or he's had the characters say things that really the audience, the readers would infer anyway, right? Other kinds of things that could be cut, right? And so look, the goal is not to make the book what I want to see, right? The goal is within the constraints we have to best realize Christopher's vision. And I think we're getting there. I think it's working. And I actually feel very strongly about this. I like the series. I like the guy, right? But also the dude's freaking 30, right? So DAW are idiots for letting him go because he's got a fan base and a growing fan base. He might be writing books for 40 more years, right?
And he can also write more than 2 books.
He can write more than 2 books. And by the way, copyright laws means whoever publishes the book might be making money on his books for 120 years, right? Like that's not the guy that you throw out the door if you're trying to like get rid of too many white guys or whatever your reason is for doing it.
There's no might about it, Christopher. If you see this, you will be writing books for 40 years. I hope you read the fine print, buddy.
Yes, correct. I actually got your soul now.
You don't leave the family once you join.
So
we won't talk about what Kathy might be working on in the background.
Yeah,
it's blood in, blood out, I hear.
So my goal is like the book, but also I want the writer to have a great experience and be happy and like be producing what he wants to produce, and yeah, that's my role.
So not counting magic systems and grimdark and incest, what are your pet peeves when you're editing a book that's maybe not by Christopher?
I was just going to ask him that because I want to hear this too.
Yeah, it's like
Mike doesn't have a vested interest in this answer at all.
I don't think Dave actually edits my books.
I haven't yet.
Is that a challenge?
It might.
I've already told him that if that happens, I find out he's going to edit one, I'm going to put in like a 5-page, just completely cringe sex scene, just to make him slog through it.
To force me to read through. When does this end? God, not more.
Dave, that's cutting off his nose to spite his face, though, because that forces him to write the 5-page scene.
Worth it.
Yeah. Man, that's a good question. I have pet peeves.
Like if I wanted to submit a book and still have it be published, but also just annoy you throughout the entire process, how would I go about doing that?
Well, it would have to successfully do all the stuff we talked about before.
Right.
I think snark is easy to overuse. So like really snarky books are annoying, but I have edited some really snarky books that we've published, right? And that's an example of like books where I'm like, ooh, this is not for me, but we're
So-
publishing it, so I'm just going through and
So I can't write the next Marvel movie, basically.
I'm going to go ahead and say that I also have just kind of. I feel like in the last 20 years they've overdone snark to the point where they've almost ruined it as a form of comedy. You know, it became like a personality trait for so many people.
The only personality trait.
Yes.
the only personality trait. Everybody is blue.
It's like, anybody who describes themselves as snarky, you're like, this guy is insufferable.
It's also they misuse it because like Han Solo is snarky, right? Like he will talk back to the other characters and whole crack wise in otherwise serious situations, but he's still taking the situation seriously. And it goes back to what we're saying, like that the characters need to take the situation seriously in the world seriously. Whether the audience needs to or not is a different story altogether. But the snark that gets employed by modern day writers, a lot of times in the film industry, but in the literary industry as well, is they make it so that the characters don't take the story seriously. And they use their snark to be like, oh, I'm aware of this trope. And also I'm aware of my stats and things like that. You know,
the whole snark thing kind of reminds me of Screwtape's take on flippancy.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Let's see. But flippancy is the best of all. In the first place, it is very economical. Only a clever human can make a real joke about virtue, or indeed about anything else. Any of them can be trained to talk as if virtue were funny. Among flippant people, the joke is always assumed to have been made. No one actually makes it, but every serious subject is discussed in a manner which implies that they have already found a ridiculous side to it. If prolonged, the habit of flippancy builds up around a man the finest armor plating against the enemy that I know, and it is quite free from the dangers inherent in other sources of laughter. It is 1,000 miles away from joy. It deadens instead of sharpening the intellect, and it excites no affection between those who practice it.
So this is
he would have hated The Office.
Yeah, that's true. That's really on point, Pete. There's like an ironic distance between the characters and the story. Like, and I think Coop, you're exactly right. Marvel has really pushed this hard into the culture, right? And like the best moments in Marvel are not snarky. Like where that guy who's just an ordinary guy stands up to Loki and says, "Well, there are always men like you," right? That's not flippant. It's not snarky. It's unironic. Or where Captain America is talking to Loki, and he says, "There is only one God, and he doesn't look like you." Right?
Which guy? When he's jumping out of the plane to go join the fight, and what's her name? Black Widow says like, "You're no match for them. They're basically gods." And that's when he says that line. He's like, "I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that." It's showing that he has faith in God. It shows that he's not of this, godless heathen, modern world, but also that he is not afraid of these other beings,
right?
Regardless of whatever their fucking power level is or whatever, like
But it's totally
not recognize them as deities,
right?
And he's still
totally
going to
not
fight
flippant, right? I mean, there's a chance he's going to die, right? It's not.
But there is some humor in that line, but like you said, it's not flippant. It's not snarky.
Yeah. So I have a very limited. It's just got to be done right, and we're in a too snarky age. So yeah, that'd be a pet peeve.
Well, it's because snark. The reason everybody uses it as a personality trait is because snark is a defense mechanism, right?
Yep.
It's to guard yourself from whatever the situation is or any sort of threats or adversity are that you're involved in. And it's kind of to put distance between yourself and it and to elevate yourself like, oh, this is beneath me. I'm too clever for this situation.
Yep.
And
I
so
cannot
it's
be
it's a
harmed by
defense
this.
mechanism.
Yeah.
It's not
This,
an engagement with the actual
this
events.
started to kind of creep into the pop culture more mainstream in the 90s. You know, and a lot of time in the 90s, a lot of like pop culture started to get really cynical about stuff, like, which is weird because it was like an economic boom time and everything was great for a lot of people, you know, but there was that very, you know, yeah, fuck the whole system, man. It's all, you know, like that. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from. Is right. People don't want to get emotionally invested in anything because they don't want it to blow up in their face.
Well, in the 90s, it was the Daria effect. It's where it's like they, you know, everything was looking on the up and up. Like you said, you have an economic boom. There's no major world war until, you know, the Balkans. But which got so everything seemed kind of hunky dory, and so that you have all these people in the pop culture sphere, whether that's Hollywood or books or comics or whatever, and it was this elitism of like, no, I'm actually miserable and you should be miserable too, because all this happiness and goodness and, you know, comfort in the world is just an illusion.
Well,
And if you don't see that it's an illusion, it's because you're stupid.
if everything is
And then
kind of fine and you're still miserable all the time, you're not counterculture. You're just like depressed and
Right. But if I can tell a bunch of depressed teenagers that the reason they're miserable is because they're smarter than everybody else, and all the happy people are just too stupid to realize they shouldn't be happy, it validates every shortcoming that they have in themselves. It validates their misery, which is why Daria was such a huge fucking thing for like every teenage girl in the late 90s and early 2000s.
And it undercuts it undercuts so much of what matters in the human experience and what is good and valuable in literature, right?
Right.
Like the flippancy, the irony, the assuming that all the smart people dismiss patriotism or dismiss love or dismiss faith, right? It's so corrosive. So yeah, Han Solo is different, right? And in fact, Han Solo is a character who notwithstanding that in episode 7 all of his growth just got rewound and taken away, right? But he was a character who he needed to grow. He needed to overcome exactly that ironic distance and get serious about a cause, right? Luke can only win in episode 4 because Han Solo finds it in himself to stand up for something, to not be flippant and ironic, to come back and risk his life for the rebellion, and and shoots Darth Vader, and that allows Luke to destroy the Death Star, right?
And that's also why there are only 3 Star Wars movies.
Correct. There are only 3 Indiana Jones movies. By damn.
Yes.
Isn't it weird that by the 4th outing in all of these, Harrison Ford cannot play a successful dad for his life? Yeah. He always abandons his kid. His marriage always falls apart. He always returns to the same shit he's been doing, 30 years ago.
Well, 30 years ago, Harrison Ford was an actor. Now he's still an actor.
Well, no, he's a lousy pilot.
There are 3 Star Wars movies, 3 Indiana Jones movies, and 2 Alien movies.
There you go. There you go.
But I think coming back to what you said, Coop, about the snark being a defense mechanism, I think it's in some ways more than it may be justified as a defense mechanism to some people, but at the root of it, that, you're miserable because you're so much smarter than all these rubes who believe in all this good stuff. That's pride.
It's pride.
That is pride and arrogance to a corrosive level, to deadly sin level.
But it's also as Dave said, where it dismisses all these positive communities that will elevate you.
I think
right?
I think he was right, but even though it is pride, I think he was right about it being a defensive mechanism, because I think that comes in many cases from deep insecurity.
Well, that's how most defense mechanisms related to pride manifest. Is you're insecure about something, so you put up a guard in order to protect your pride in that insecurity.
I mean, this isn't just feckless arrogance. It's like deep down, these people know there's something
Right.
They're not the person they wish they were.
Which is why it dismisses the communal structures and circles that elevate you. A church community will elevate you. A loving family will elevate you. A strong, friend group that they have each other's interests at heart will elevate you. If you dismiss all those and separate yourself from those, and you only hang out with people who are just as miserable as you and keep you miserable so that to justify their own misery, that brings you down. It brings everybody down, but it brings you guys down as like a pile to climb on top of each other, so that you're the king of the hill down in hell, basically.
Somebody in the Pablo John mentioned in the comments that he had a touch of that as a teenager. A lot of us did. That's actually fairly common when you're a teenager. And that
goes back to the Daria thing. That's why it was so popular amongst teenagers, because when are you at your most miserable and depressed and confused is when you're a teenager, because you're going through this thing called puberty, unless you took the blockers, which let's not go into. But it's a very confusing, horrifying, scary time in your life, and things aren't going to go your way. Things aren't going to change the way that you wanted them to change. And so you're going to be upset about a lot of things. And if you are upset, if you can convince yourself that it's not just something that everybody goes through, but it's because you're superior to the people around you, that is a validating, enabling sort of
and
effect. It's a dopamine hit.
Most people traditionally would grow out of it as you grow. As you grow into your 20s, you grow up, and one of the normal things about growing up is you look back at your teenage and early 20 years and kind of cringe a little bit. You're like, oh God, everybody knows what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
People who don't have their own personal real life character arc, who didn't grow as a person, that's a problem. And there are people like that out there, and they write for television shows.
There are a lot of people out there.
Well,
However, we're almost 2 hours in, so we can get into some of this stuff. There is a certain subset of people who finds that kind of mentality useful. And
they're called manipulators.
Yes, but they're also revolutionaries find that kind of mentality extremely useful. And there have been a lot of revolutionaries in media, particularly over the last 50, 60 years. And they've continued to push this kind of I wasn't really familiar with the Daria you were talking about, Coop, but just all of that sort of. Well, I've started seeing it with the whole X-Men mutants thing. It's like, if you're weird, it means you're actually superior.
Yeah,
if you're an outsider, you're actually better than those people.
Yeah. So
that was a trope in some of the early Golden Age science fiction too, about the superior generation of man.
Well, it goes into that whole like paranormal romance thing, or even the dystopian teen fiction, young adult novels that were popular for a while. It was always society is structured a certain way, and the protagonist doesn't fit directly, neatly into it, and therefore they're actually the savior of the universe. So
the worst example of that is
they're gonna be in a love triangle.
Is Divergent, where they literally had society divided up into castes based on a single personality trait. It was the most arbitrary and absurd thing, and I can't.
You know what that is? That's a gamification. That is a hard social system.
Based on something like the Myers-Briggs personality indicator test. I think it's only 5 traits or something.
It goes into what Pete said. It's like if society structured you on character class.
Yeah. My book's hard social system.
That sounds thrilling, but that's okay because you're a strong-willed young teenage girl and you will overcome them. And bring the whole system down.
Well, that's right.
I mean,
that's the message.
Look, at the end of the day, like the reason it's successful is because it's a power fantasy, which is fine. Like a lot of fiction can be power fantasies, and that's kind of the appeal to it. That's why like a lot of video games are so popular, is because the character avatar is a power fantasy, and you get to just wail on endless amounts of enemies and that stuff.
Doom being the penultimate example.
Yeah,
of that.
you know, I'm not going to say Doom is a terrible story because the Doom guy is overpowered. It's like, no, that's the point. That's why he's able to survive a hell invasion on Mars, or I'm sorry, Deimos and Phobos. But it's the power fantasy is not the problem with that genre. It's that it's so overtly, transparently, like not well. It's a mile wide and an inch deep, you know. It's like where, okay, you're not divided into society based on like utility or functionality or anything like that. It's what is your one personality trait that you learned on a BuzzFeed quiz? That's your life for the rest of, you know. And they used it even in like Harry Potter, you know. It was the fucking the house system, and everybody in the house is just like one certain way, to the point where you have the fucking evil house. It's like,
right.
Like, why do we even have the evil house at the school?
Yeah.
Doesn't it seem like this is going to backfire at some point?
It seems like most of our problems can be solved by, like, you know, canceling the Satanist house. But
how did this totally predictable breakdown happen?
Well, you know, those are all the rich people, and they fund our school. So this fucking lobbyists, man.
Well, you know, they got a lot. Yeah, they got a lot of donors from the
Slytherin.
yeah. You know what I mean? It's like it's so it really is. Especially as that genre went on, and like people understood that it is a genre and it has to follow certain tropes. The tropes are always it's a mile wide and an inch deep, instead of like, all right, let's focus on one aspect and really explore it. Instead, it's just like, what fucking whimsical bullshit that makes absolutely no sense except on this certain page can we throw in here? So,
hey, something he mentioned gave me an idea for a question for Dave. Dave, and it's gone. Keep talking.
It'll come back.
Yeah,
Okay.
don't bring. Oh, it came back. It came back. Does a story or a manuscript, does it have to adhere to all the tropes of a genre? Is it expected to? Does it have to? What are your feelings on this? Is it better if it does? Should it branch out? Should it try to break the tropes? What do you think?
So that's an interesting question. And it relates to things we said before. And I am close to a lot of indie writers, and so one of the things that I see, and I think in fact Coop was using this language just a minute ago, is a belief that you know, when they sort of identify the Amazon rankings indicate that there's a demand for a certain genre. What they'll study is the tropes. What do the books have in common that consistently do well in this space? Okay. And then, yes, there's sort of marketing in terms of cover design and how do I announce the book and stuff, but there's also, there's like a marketing loop built into writing the book, which is I have to make sure that I hit all the tropes. Right. And I understand that, right? I have, that is what it is. Baen doesn't think about it like that. In fact, I have heard Tony say that she likes books that push fantasy into new and different directions, right? So I think the book that she first published of mine, right, because I'm a Baen editor, but Baen is also my principal publisher, is an epic fantasy novel but it's set in a kind of an 1815 America, and it's not exactly alternate history either, in the sort of Harry Turtledove sense, where you go back and you go, oh, back in the year 1742, this thing different happened, and therefore history is different. Like, that's not how it works. It's more like a sort of a funhouse mirror.
They understood the power of steam and goggles.
Right, exactly. It's sort of a funhouse mirror held up to Earth, and a kind of a lampoon, seeing Earth, seeing an 1815 America as an epic fantasy thing. And is different. I don't want to claim too much uniqueness, but it wasn't part of a movement. There weren't like 5 other things like that out there. It was something that was maybe new, right? And I think that's part of what she liked and made her willing to take a take a shot with me. So I think she would like to see. There's like a paradox here, right? From a marketing point of view, what you want to be able to say is, this book is like those things you love, but it has this little thing that's different that'll make it interesting to you.
It's like hashtags for your book.
Yeah, and so you want people to look at the cover and read the back cover copy and feel like, oh man, this is probably going to give me the same kind of thrills I had reading Wheel of Time or reading, Harry Potter, right? But it's not a ripoff of Harry Potter because it's about a dinosaur riding school or whatever, right? So like from a marketing point of view, that's what you want. But like, again, I think I can say this. I think I can say we here. I can definitely say I, but I think I can include Tony in this statement. We care about the art. We care about the art. And so, to some extent, there are going to be some tropes that sort of like, they're just part of the genre. They tell us what, they put you in the genre. But we'd like to see something that we haven't seen before because you, the writer, have a different perspective, or because you're accurately, channeling, reflecting something about your time, which is different from Robert E. Howard's time, or, from Michael Moorcock's time, or whoever, right? So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about making sure you hit the tropes. I think I would worry about, the stuff I said before, being pro-human, adventure, admirable characters, and then telling the truest story you can tell, right? Telling a story that you care about, that you believe in, that you think, man, this is the story. Here's one way I think about it when I write, right? Like, what am I writing? I'm writing the stories that I wish were already out there so I didn't have to write them, right? Like, this is the story that I want to read, so I'm going to create it so that it exists. And I wouldn't worry too much about the tropes. Now, if your book is incomprehensible from a genre point of view, right? Because I can't tell whether it's got magic or science fiction, or I can't tell if it's is or isn't a romance. Maybe you could stand a little more attention to genre, and tropes may be a tool to help you do that.
Tropes aren't necessarily bad. Some people associate a trope with being like automatically being hackneyed. Well, tropes exist for a reason. Some of these are basic storytelling mechanisms that we've been using since the beginning of time. So,
right. But a lot of that has come because people have expanded the definition of trope to just mean like story conventions.
yes,
It's like where the hero's journey is a trope. It's like, no, that's a narrative structure. Like,
there's a Nick Cave. There's a great Nick Cave quote about sort of on this point. He says a cliche is just an idea that is so powerful that you can't avoid it. And I think there's something to that. Like I don't think necessarily having tropes is a problem. And I don't think you need to be making sure you do include all the tropes either. I think, you try and tell a true story, and like that's the thing, right? Succeed at that, and I think everything else will follow.
Good answer. Good answer.
I'm
There-
glad I
there
meet
seems
your
to be-
approval. If Mike was like, nope, that's shit. This is what it means.
It's like I'm cutting Dave out now. Shh, Dave, out of
Well, they don't let me control the stream. Don't worry.
Well,
that's why you keep getting knocked out. It's actually Coop just kicking you out of the stream.
He doesn't let Coop control it either.
I do not have that kind of power. If I want to kick somebody out of the stream, I have to make them willingly leave.
He is good at that.
Better at than I like to admit, but John Payne brings up a good thing. The damsel in distress is a cliche for a reason. Yeah, there are certain tropes or cliches that, like, they're powerful story mechanisms, but because of the political or cultural nature of the time, like, they're sneered at. Like, there was a website created by now a published comic book writer called Women in Fridges, right? And this was taking aim at a storyline in a Green Lantern comic book where the main character's girlfriend taking aim at a storyline in a Green Lantern comic book where the main character. Who was that? Anyways, so she was killed and put in a refrigerator for the main character to find and break him psychologically, right? And they thought that this was the most misogynistic thing ever, and that it repeatedly showed up in comic books. And so they would point to any time a girlfriend or a wife or it wasn't even just women. It was any time somebody important to the main character was killed in a gruesome way. And they were saying this is bad, and the comic industry needs to move beyond this. It was like, this is just basic character motivation. Okay, if you want me to, like, throw caution in the wind and go fight a bad guy that needs to be defeated, regardless of the fact that they are way more powerful than me or a step ahead of me at every point, I need to have a reason to forego all those dangers and go and get the job done. What's more basic than having a loved one get killed by the bad guy, right?
that
But
goes
they-
back thousands of years.
Yeah, they turned this into, like, this dirty word. It's like, oh, you can't have, a loved one die in a story to motivate the main character. Why the fuck not?
Right.
What do they have to, like, do identity theft and ruin his credit score for him to go after them? No, fucking
Right.
I will find you. I will kill you.
The villain has to have wrong ideology. That's the only
Uh,
reason to attack him.
They ratioed me on Twitter. I'm gonna go stop this Galacticus guy.
Yeah,
There's a great Jordan Peterson book. Not the famous ones, right? Like, I haven't read 12 Rules for a Living or whatever. He wrote a book of Jungian psychology. I think it's called Maps of Meaning.
Okay.
And he says, look, Jung talked about everybody having within them sort of these archetypes that, these very powerful images. Like a man has within him an image of what a woman is, and a woman has an image within her of what a man is. And to some extent, if I'm talking to my wife, I'm talking to Emily, but also, like, I'm interacting with that image, right? And he says people people took Jung to be talking sort of magically, like we just magically have this image. And Peterson says, no, where these images come from is common human experience. And he traces it to sort of most fundamentally the experience of novelty, right? And this and like, where does this idea of the hero's journey that we see across all these cultures come from? And these ideas of the demon and the village in drought. It says, well, we all have experience of from when we're very tiny, from encountering things that are new, and we all build up images of that derive ultimately from the experience of something that is new, that is terrifying, or suddenly I no longer have something I used to have, is a disaster that threatens the village, right? And these archetypes come from the fact that we all have the experience of encountering novelty as a threat or as a big question, and in our life having to kind of venture into new space, master a new ability to be able to incorporate the novelty into our worldview, right? And now I can't remember what thing you were saying I was responding to. Like women in fridges, right?
Yeah.
So
if I ever write a book, there's going to have a woman in a fridge just to piss off that website.
It's going to start with a woman in a fridge.
Yeah, oh yeah.
The woman was in the fridge.
She's alive. She's just stupid.
They belong in the kitchen. They belong in the fridge. Okay.
Yeah, he just fell in.
Barefoot in the fridge.
We have these experiences because they're fun. This is the point, right? We have these archetypes. We have these cliches. We have these stereotypical ideas because they're fundamental to our human experience, either actual or metaphorical, right? I actually do things to try to provide for my wife and children, right? Like actually that is my heroic quest, right? And if therefore that's a pretty good metaphor for other heroic quests I undertake. And it's silly to pretend it's not. It's silly and it's ironic, right? It's distancing yourself from things that matter.
It's also a fundamental form of catharsis that a reader can relate to. And because enough people have had loved ones die in their life and they want some sort of what they would give for a way to let out their rage and anguish, right? Whether that's putting the blame on somebody else, whether like they really did get murdered, or if it's just putting the blame on somebody else and doing something to enact revenge. That is a powerful form of catharsis that a reader can relate to. So, I mean, yeah.
It's something almost anybody can understand, even if they haven't experienced it. Anybody can think about someone they care about. Like, what if somebody killed this person? What if somebody took my child or my wife or my parents away from me, just like that? What would I do? How would I react? How would that make me feel?
You could go to magic boarding school. That's what.
Oh.
Dinosaur riding school. That's the new trend.
I like that. I'm part of House Velocirin.
Exactly right.
Dave, you pointed out that a lot of these things are part of, on a deep level, they're part of what makes us human. And I think we're running into a lot of, like we talked some this tonight about the exclusive left brain, almost autistic. Sometimes it seems to be a narrow line between autistic or psychopathic. For some of these people, it's like, to use a term that I heard somebody use, these people don't human well, so naturally they don't write interesting characters. There seems to be, and maybe some of it is an artifact of this disconnect, this atomization that we've seen with everything being digital and separated, but just some of these basic human things, either some of these people don't seem to understand or they actively want to do away with.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? Like what is the enterprise of literature? Like, what are we doing
to make money? What? No.
Well, I actually look. I will tell you, Coop. Okay, I'm gonna criticize. This is criticism now. I'm not of you guys, but like a couple of years in a row now, I've gone to 20 books to 50K conference. Okay, which is principally a self-writing conference. And I love the organizers and I love a lot of the people I met there. But I always come away depressed. And the reason is because the whole 5 days, people talk to me about, oh, dude, here's how many copies I sell. Here's my strategy for selling. And here's my marketing. And like no one ever says love, right? This is about love. This is about meaning. The reason I do this is because I care about what I'm saying. And I'm not saying
that they couldn't afford to go to the convention. They're poor.
That's right. They're poor. Maybe that's right. Or maybe they're all thinking that, but they're not saying it because the purpose of the convention is to talk about sales. I don't know. I don't know. But like, what is the enterprise of literature? I mean, I think it's the field notes of, I think when I write a book, I'm writing, these are the field notes of my experience as a member of the human species, right? It's not a literal field notes. That's my journal. It's a metaphorical field notes. Look, this is what I think about people. And this is what I think about what matters. And this is what I think, the secret connections that hold the universe together are. And I worry that a lot of writers that's not right. That's not what they're doing. That they maybe are just trying to make money, or that they maybe are, maybe they don't know what the enterprise of literature is.
There has got to be a better career path if money is your goal than being an author.
Almost anything else would pay better.
That's been my experience. Is I make way more money doing other stuff. Now a few, right? Like J.K. Rowling made a lot of money, but like she's not the typical, right? She's the one. So yeah, it feels like that some people want to tear down literature as an exploration of meaning and what matters, and a sharing of meaning and what matters, in favor of maybe nothing, maybe just to make money, right? Like I think a lot of Grimdark was like, oh, I'm going to be different by shocking you. But I
think they're trying to tear it down because if expressing what matters and relating a bunch of different human experiences together is allowed, then any idea can be put out there and flourish. And that's threatening to a lot of people who have an idea of what's allowed to be put out there and flourish, and what's allowed to be said.
And that's not even necessarily like a political thing. There are just some people out there who just don't want anybody to be happy because they're miserable people. And that reflects their politics, but they're just miserable people.
Or you can be like me and be a complete chauvinist. I fucking hate anime. If that entire genre just disappeared, I'd be happy. I want all anime to fail and not flourish. But a lot of people like that, and I don't have the power to stop it. So it's like, all right, whatever. Just enjoy your things. Just don't do it around kids.
I mean, I think there is also a political thing, right? I mean, I think there is a political, not even necessarily conscious, but a will to remove anything that is a power center independent of the central party state. And that does mean actually disempowering the nuclear family. And it does mean actually devaluing love. And it does mean, convincing people to look away from God and not even try, right? It's the C.S. Lewis quote, acting like the joke's already been told. We know, oh, that's funny. God, right? Very serious people for thousands of years have thought really hard and tried to figure out God and tried to find their way to God, right? And to convince a generation not even to think about it, right? That all good flows from the ideology. I think that is I think that there's more than politics going on, but I do think there's politics going on.
Which is why we need a teenage girl to, buck the system and save us all from this dystopian civilization that we're tumbling into.
What Dave was saying, and kind of reminded me of this. I had a conversation with Brad Torgerson one night just about how we became writers, right? And it's something he wanted for a long time, and he worked very hard to get into it. And I never aspired to it at all. I wrote for fun on the internet, and it just fell into my lap. An opportunity. That's how I met Larry. And the next thing I know, I had a publishing contract I was lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. I make no bones about that. I'm not going to pretend it was just raw talent. I was extremely lucky. And I write because it would be a waste of that opportunity not to. I get some enjoyment out of it, but it's a job. There are times when you hate it like you do any other job because it's a job. And there are times when it's frustrating. There are times when you want to quit. But I do care about, it sounds so pretentious, but I do care about the art. I want what I write to be as good as it can be. I don't want to just like chase some algorithm, and try to this is what the algorithm thinks people want. Well, the algorithm thinks that all these people like the same thing, so they should be friends. That the algorithm's wrong about that. So,
Mike, for somebody who does it for the art and loves the art, need I remind you, your Twitter handle is Rocket Pulp Hack.
I didn't say I love the art.
But that's interesting, isn't it?
You friend zoned the art. Yeah.
Friend zoned the art. It's interesting that you should feel self-conscious, right? Like why should we feel self-conscious saying, I believe in beauty and truth, right? I care about what's in this book.
Because then you sound like a dork.
I think it's back to we live in this age of irony, right? And to sound cool, you have to be flippant. Like for a person to stand up and say, love matters to me, right? Like that's ooh.
Well, that if you just
man, you got to wear the backpack with one strap. I would no strap it if I could.
Correct, no strap. It's just Velcro. It just hangs on the back.
Just a G.I. Joe backpack stuck into the hole in his back.
Honestly, in the leg.
For me personally, part of the issue is I have a hard time telling people who don't already know that I'm a writer. I don't talk about the writing very much. My wife will tell people, and honestly, it's embarrassing sometimes. Not because I'm embarrassed of my work or that I'm embarrassed to be a writer, but it sounds really pretentious. Because
that could have gone two ways. I thought you were going to be like, I'm just embarrassed of the other writers and my peers. They give me a bad name.
There is a certain type of person who is very pretentious and talks about writing all the time, and they don't actually do very much of it, and they're not very good. But they're the sort of like the snark that we've talked about with they
mainly writers, write news articles and tweets rather than books, though.
And us working schlubs don't necessarily want to be associated with those kinds of people. So,
well, that and when somebody says I'm a writer, to me it brings up the context of like some dork sitting in a coffee house in Seattle. He brought his typewriter in because he wants you to know how retro he is. It just sounds kind of, and I don't like that. I'm also kind of worried on some of they won't believe me. They think I'm making things try to sound cool. Like no shit. People
like, so you're unemployed then.
A Canadian girlfriend.
Yeah. People ask me things like, so do you pay them to publish? Like, no, they pay me, honest.
Well, you know what? It's probably because they've met so many people that do claim to be writers as their main thing. And it turns out that they went to a vanity publisher or self-published and paid the hell.
These days it might mean you write articles on politics on the internet, oh, I'm a writer. I have a Substack. Shut up. You're a blogger.
Well, it's oh man, it's just you can't choose the industry well, I mean, you can choose the industry you're a part of. You just can't choose how the industry acts.
No.
Yeah. But it's as far as I will say this again to all the aspiring writers out there. If you want to be a novelist, find something else to do. I'm not saying don't be a novelist, but find something else to do.
But also do something else.
So you can afford to eat while you're writing your novel. Because
that's good advice.
Every J.K. Rowling out there, there's a million dudes who sold one book to their mom.
Yeah, don't quit your day job remains very good advice.
At half price, Mike. Just
I know a lot of writers, and I don't know very many who only do that. And some
It
guys
takes
do it, but they just have a good day job. But other people, it would be a big financial hit going to write it. And not only just because of how much money you make, but it's unstable, it's unsteady income. You know, it goes up and down, and until you've really made it, like a lot of what your income is out of your control. Because ultimately, you can't control whether or not the audience likes the book or not. You do your best.
It's also,
you hope, but
it's also, with the exception of like the right out the gate hits like J.K. Rowling or whoever, the richest authors are the ones with a huge backlist, right? Where they're getting royalties off of like 10 books ago, and then all that accumulates up. So it's like, it's not an industry where you like strike gold immediately. You know, you have to
it's a marathon, not a
10
sprint.
years to be an overnight success, basically.
that's the other question I get. I get when people find out writers. They ask you if you make a lot of money, and you're like, no.
Well, because
You
they,
can't.
they think that being an author is like being Castle, right? You know, like you're playing poker with, you know, all the bestsellers.
Yeah, no, you don't. My books aren't in the airport, guys. Sorry. You know,
Mine really are.
You're several
I mean,
pews above me.
They could be if you just like took your books and placed them on the shelves at the airport.
That's correct.
I mean, you're not going to get any money from the royalties on that, but like that's working for exposure, right?
Yeah. People die of exposure, don't you know?
Mummy romance. Hey, we should
I could wrap myself around that.
kick him.
I have done that before.
Yeah, but not for a
At
dad
the very
joke.
beginning of the Scream, too.
I know I'm not going to get kicked over a dad joke. You make more of them than any of us.
Yeah. Got you there.
No, it's Pablo, John, you go wash your mouth out with soap.
You're like the only Marine I know that's written more books than Navy SEALs.
And none of them about me.
Yeah.
Did you guys?
None of your books have any top secret information revealed in them. That's weird.
No. Go figure.
Well,
What were you saying, Mike?
That's out. Well, that's outdated. These days, the place to reveal your top secret information is on a Discord server to win an argument.
War Thunder forums.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dude,
Yeah.
if you're a military sci-fi or a sci-fi writer, the best research tool you have is these video game forums where like people post top secret classified information. It's like, huh, I didn't know the Abrams could do that. All right.
Well, neither did the Russians until now. Thanks a lot, dipshit.
Funny part was the first one of those leaks was a Brit about the Challenger.
Well, that's what we call hard military. So that's where you can reveal your stats, and it still doesn't matter because tactics reign supreme.
Yeah. That's getting into a whole other conversation that I've gotten into before. But
Well, folks, it has been. We are nearly at the 2.5 hour mark, and this has been super fun. But I think Dave has been partying at the con all day.
It's true. Do I look peaked, drained?
Well, before we end it, though, why don't you
Irony.
go ahead and let the fine viewers know what works you have out and coming out soon. Anything they should check out?
Oh man. What's coming out now is called Between Princesses and Other Jobs. And it's book 2 in a series, but you could read it first. It's a collection of short stories about a couple of and one novella about a couple of sword slingers in an old, decayed, corrupt city. It's sword and sorcery ish, bit of a twist. Book 1 is called In the Palace of Shadow and Joy. If you wanna look up that first. My big series, I think, is called The Witchy War, and book 1 there is called Witchy Eye, which should be soon actually available as a free ebook on Baen, but you can get these I'm generally stocked in Barnes and Nobles and other kind of reasonably sized bookstores. Obviously, I'm on Amazon. DJ Butler, as the screen has it, is the name under which I publish for adults.
Mike does the same thing.
Yep.
Our sales have been really good lately.
Awesome. Good.
Also, he's not a real DJ. He has many talents. That's not one of them.
That is, I am not, in fact, a DJ. I cannot
It's been to
use.
save his life.
Well, you could be if you brought all your instruments with you.
Yes, that's true. I'd need to have turntables.
Now, Dave, since it came up now, I described you as a bard, and people were surprised. What instruments do you actually play?
So I'm pretty mediocre on guitar, and then I suck at a lot of other stuff. I play a banjo, mandolin, harmonicas, lap dulcimer, auto harp, stuff like that. I got a pretty big collection.
A photo of you with a hurdy-gurdy, which before I met my wife, if somebody would have told me that a hurdy-gurdy was a real musical instrument, my reaction would have been, no, it isn't. Shut up.
Yeah, that actually belongs to my
King
mother.
called it that once.
That's funny. That is in fact my mom's hurdy-gurdy. I am envious of her hurdy. She bought a hurdy-gurdy and she knew I would be jealous. She said, "Come over and check out my hurdy-gurdy." So I went over to my mom's house and handled her hurdy-gurdy, and that was it. And I think in that picture I've got like a tuner on my knee because I realized her drone strings were out of tune, and so I was fixing it for her. Yeah, I love instruments. I love self-recording. A lot of my books have song lyrics in them. When they do, it's because they're actual songs. Like they have music and a chord structure.
Hey, hello, John. That's an accordion. That's not a hurdy-gurdy.
Yeah,
hurdy-gurdy is it's a string instrument, right? Yes.
It looks like a mechanical violin, kind of, that sits on your lap, and instead of fretting, well, you don't fret, but instead of like touching the strings to the fretboard with your finger and playing the string with like a bow, right? You press buttons to basically mechanically depress the strings, and then there's a rosined wheel with a crank, and so you crank the wheel, and the result is a drone. These sort of long droning melodies, and even though it's basically a mechanical instrument, it's also a medieval instrument.
Well, it's also, when that came out, that was like the height of musical technology. It was like the amp and the electric guitar came out all at once. They're just like, yes,
right.
The dulcimer is on the list of unusual musical instruments too that I just looked up here. So
yeah, my mom played the dulcimer.
Now there's two kinds. There's the hammer dulcimer, which is like a board with strings on it, and you hit the strings. We've got lap dulcimers, which
the hurdy-gurdy is also on this list. So
see, doesn't that look cool? Doesn't that make you want to have a hurdy-gurdy though? Like nobody else in your neighborhood owns one of those. If you had that, people would be like, "Dude, that guy Coopery has a hurdy-gurdy." You
should get a Carith.
Well, he's also in the Midwest, so people would be like, "Why is that instrument not shredding my cheese?"
We need to buy a vowel.
That's interesting. Is that Welsh? In Welsh, the W is an oo sound.
It is Welsh.
It's a cruth.
You should definitely learn to play the pan flute. That's next on there.
No, you can't.
Mike's just going down the list.
Yeah. Hey, what's that little electric thing where it had like the metal rod that sticks up and you move the thing to it?
The theremin.
Yes, you need to play a theremin.
I do need to get a theremin. It is the space age instrument, and I should get one.
Well, if you get a zither, you can play the Third Man theme.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. I don't have a zither. Auto harp is a kind of zither, but it's not. Okay. It's not a true zither.
And he sings.
Yeah, so I do you guys know like what filk is? If I say filk music, does that?
From my understanding,
it sounds like a politically correct way of saying getting gypped.
No.
He filked to me.
My understanding, it started off. It's a sort of like it's a spin-off of folk songs that people would start off in cons years ago, and there are some of them on YouTube. even like older ones that I found.
Yeah.
Some good. I'm sure a lot of them are awful.
Mostly awful, but you can look up filk music. It does sound like folk. The name has its origin in a typo, right? So I forget the year, but it's like 1959 or something, and it's the World Science Fiction Convention, and there's supposed to be a demonstration of folk music, and the program has a typo, and they say filk music, and it's stuck, but it is the folk music of science fiction fandom. So at conventions like today, people were saying we had a guitar at the con because my daughter's learning guitar, so we were looking at chords and stuff together, and like in downtime, and people would see the guitar and say, "Oh, where's the filk tonight? Where's the filk?" So there's this strain of extremely gentle, very nice people who get together late at nights at the end of these conventions and like sing their own lyrics to pop songs, but the new rewritten lyrics are about Star Trek characters, right? Or things like that. So yeah, I'm sort of I'm marginal to the filk scene. I've written a lot of my own songs, and I'll go there. And really, that's not meant to be like a venue for someone to show up and like just sing his own songs, but I do it anyway. And they're nice, so they don't chase me away with sticks like they probably have a right to do. So yeah, that's like a weird current in science fiction fandom that I sort of participated.
That's the most American origin story. If you guys, it's like we'll do that all the time. It'd be like, we'll misspell something, and then that's just the way it is. It's aluminum. It's not aluminium. Fuck you.
Right.
We call it Des Moines, not Des Moines.
That is correct. So yeah, so I do that. I have music in my books. I record albums for some of them. I was a musical guest at a convention in January. Actually, so I had a guy on Twitter who said, like last week, he said, "Hey Dave, are you available to be the musical guest at a convention in January?" I said, "Yeah, sure. What convention?" He said, the Libertarian Party of the state of Georgia is having its nominating convention. I want you to come be the musical guest. So I said, of course, I will happily do that. I don't have the details. I don't have confirmation, but yes, if that pans out, I will be filking for the Georgia Libertarians. I'm very excited about that.
Best of luck, brother.
Mike, what do you want to push tonight?
Well, I'm still working on the same draft I've been working on for the past few things, which I will get it finished. But, like I said, sometimes you hate writing, and that time is now.
Pete, what about you, brother?
Well, Silver Lead came out end of last month. I'm working on the fourth book in that series, Frontiers of Chaos, which should be out in August. And I just finished rewrites on my Order of the Centurion novel for Galaxy's Edge. So that's in final editing passes now. I don't have a solid release date on that, but it will be coming hopefully in the next couple of months.
All right.
Well, Dave, you were a great guest.
Oh my goodness. What a delightful conversation. Thank you guys for inviting me. I had a lot
You
of
were
fun.
the best pirate we've had on this stream so far.
You're the
Well,
best.
invite me back. I'll wear a different hat.
He has many hats. He has a badger hat.
I have a hat made out of 1.6 badgers. Yeah.
Nice. We'll have to see that one next time.
That's hard taxidermy for all you people paying attention.
0.6 badgers more than next leading publisher. So
Right.
Yeah.
your move, Daw.
Look, man, if they're
All
not
right,
getting
folks.
the Rothfuss book out, they're not getting that hat. So
Exactly.
All right, folks. We'll see you all next month.